Destiny War, Chapter 1. Axon charged across the landscape of Voyanui, weapon at the ready. He had just spied two figures materializing in the green belt. One looked something like Botar, but obviously wasn't. The other resembled a Toa, but wasn't one Axon knew. The first thing he had learned after being assigned to this place was subdue first, ask questions later. The Botar look-alike spotted Axon first and tried to block him. A sweep of an armored fist sent him sprawling. Axon was on top of the Toa in the flash of a heartlight, axe blade at the intruder's throat. "Who are you?" growled Axon. "What do you want here? Talk!" "My name is Krakua," the Toa answered, trying in vain to push the axe away from his neck. "I was sent to find you. You're needed." "Who sent you?" asked Axon. "Toa Helrix. Use your mask. You'll see I'm speaking the truth." Axon did just that, calling on the powers of his Kanohi Road, the Mask of Truth. To his surprise, it told him that his captive was indeed being honest. He got up and let Krakua get to his feet. "Your Order of Matanui, then," Axon said. "I see recruiting standards have slipped a little." Krakua paid no attention to the remark. Instead, he said, "Come with us. Your presence is required on Daxia." Before Axon could object, the Botar type had come close and activated his teleportation power. The three of them vanished from Voyanui, only to reappear in the Order of Matanui fortress on Daxia. Axon had been there before, so its appearance was no surprise to him. The sight of his former partner Brutaka was, though, not to mention the huge dragon next to him, whose bulk almost filled up the great hall. "Things must be desperate if they're calling on an old war Rahi like you," Brutaka said with a smile. "Oh, by the way, have you met Tall Green and Gruesome here? Don't mind the scales and teeth, but you might want to stay downwind of him." "Brutaka," said Axon. How did you get out of the pit?" "They let me out early for good behavior," Brutaka smiled. "But I'm the least of the shocking faces around here. This is it, my friend. The Order is about to come out of hiding after all these years. Helrix told me so herself." "What did she say?" "Two words," said Brutaka, his smile disappearing. "Destiny War." The Dark Hunter, known as Ancient, stood on the beach of the island of Odina. Behind him, rebuilding of the fortress destroyed by Pohatu Nuva went on rapidly. His eyes scanned the waters, watching for the return of Lariska from her mission. He was anxious to hear just what she had seen and heard. A cry made him look up. It came from a bat-winged Rahi wheeling through the sky, one not native to Odina. He recognized the creature as one bred for long-distance flying. More than once, the Dark Hunters had used them to send messages back and forth to agents on other islands. But the flying creature up above did not come from another Dark Hunter. As a half-dozen more joined it, they began flying in a pattern recognizable to no one on the island but Ancient. It was a message intended for him, and one that was urgent. The time had come. He had to seek out the Shadowed One and try to make him see the only possible future for the Dark Hunters, and if the Shadowed One, his old friend, failed to see reason, Ancient would have to kill him. Elsewhere, Vezon paced in his cell on Daxia. Across the corridor were two great water tanks. In one swam the six Paraka, now mutated into water snakes. In the other was a bizarre-looking being others referred to as Karzani, who seemed to Vezon to be quite insane, and Vezon knew insane. When Brutaka's team had first escaped the island of Artidax with Makuta Mizarix, they had flown to a barren island in the middle of nowhere. After a short time, Brutaka had them on the move again, this time to a place called Daxia. Brutaka explained that the location of the island had always been a secret before, but that secrecy didn't matter anymore. Neither, apparently, did Gratitude, as Vezon and Brutaka were both thrown into cells immediately upon arrival. Vezon, frankly, was disappointed. Sure, he had tried to steal the Mask of Life, and yes, he had tried to kill the Toa Nika once, well, twice, and okay, he had made an effort to trade their lives to the Zyglak in exchange for his, but it's not like that had worked. And he had volunteered, well, been forced, well, actually been threatened with bodily harm if he didn't help, but he did aid in the rescue of Makuta Mizarix. And what was his reward? A cold cell, an uncaring guard, and nothing nearby he could use to kill the Paraka. Was that justice? His musings were interrupted by the crimson-armored Trinuma. The Order member took a long look at Vezon, shrugged, and shook his head. Then he unlocked the cell door and threw it open. "It's your lucky day, misfit," said Trinuma. "You're getting out." "I am," said Vezon. Of course I am. Keeping a being of my brilliance locked away is a terrible waste of resources. No doubt your masters want to consult me on matters of strategy and tactics." "No," said Trinuma. "I think they said something about needing someone who could die horribly without being missed. So naturally they thought of you." Vezon's adult brain processed what Trinuma said and somehow decided it was a compliment. Well, naturally, he replied. Lead on and let me show you all how dying's done. To be continued. Destiny War, Chapter 2. Axon crouched down behind a low stone wall and watched the fire and ice bolts fly by overhead. Beside him, Brutaka was peering around the crumbling bit of cover, now and then hurling a blast from his sword. Knock on the front door, grumbled Axon. Great strategy. I think all that time in Mari Nui left you with a waterlogged brain. Oh, come on, said Brutaka, smiling. He picked off an attacker with a bolt of energy, then winged another. You love this, and you know it. After thousands of years sitting around on Voyanui waiting for something to happen, you need the exercise. A green-fleshed Skakti climbed over the wall, spiked club in hand. Axon quickly made him regret it. This was supposed to be a nice, simple job. Go to Zakaz, find Warlord Nektan, arrange an alliance between the Order and the Skakti, not get pinned on a beach by an angry horde. Are we pinned? We're not pinned, said Brutaka. Watch. Brutaka popped over the wall and fired an energy bolt at a half-crumbled building. Shearing through its only support, he sent the structure toppling down on a mob of Skakti. When the dust cleared, all of them were trapped beneath the rubble. Now those guys, they're pinned, said Brutaka. Axon sighed. Just like the good old days, he said. Now I remember why I hated them so much. If you like that idea, you'll love this one, Brutaka replied. Before Axon could react, Brutaka grabbed him by the back of the neck. He dragged Axon to his feet and stood beside him, free arm in the air. We surrender, Brutaka shouted to the Skakti army. Take us, we're yours. Elsewhere. A trader on the island of Stelt would, over the course of his life, see pretty much everything at least once. The place was a crossroads for the crooked, the desperate, and those just looking for fast money or a deal best kept hidden from Toa. This particular trader, though, had recently seen more than he would have wished. A small group of warriors, including the hated Rudaka, had stolen one of his best ships. Worse, they had done it in such a way that no one would even believe it had happened. Things had at last settled down, though. He had managed to find a replacement ship and recover those members of the old crew who were still alive. It was back to business as usual, at least until the 20-foot-tall dragon tore the roof off his shop. Where's Pterodax? The dragon growled. Pterodax? Who or what is that? And how would I know? Said the trader, reaching frantically for a weapon and coming up with nothing better than a cracked Kanoka disc. I know Stelt, said the dragon. A Nui Rama doesn't buzz on the Trenkrom Peninsula without you scum hearing it. So I'll ask again, where is he? Where is the Makuta of Metronui? I don't know, I swear it, shouted the trader. The dragon scooped his victim up in a great claw. I don't have time for this. I have places to be and bodies to break. I want you to send out a message to all your friends, to everyone who sails in and out of this island. Tell them Miserix is back, and when I find him, Pterodax is dead. Elsewhere once more. Vezon sat in a small skiff with a jet-black sail. Trinuma sat at the bow, keeping an eye out for potential threats. If he considered Vezon one, he didn't show it. For his part, Vezon was just happy to be out of his cell. Prison was far too confining, but then he guessed that was the point of it. Speaking of points, Trinuma had given him a lovely dagger. Vezon had said thank you by not trying to plunge it into his companion's back. Where are we going? Asked Vezon. Why are we going? Are we going at all, or just sailing in a big circle? Or is it a spiral? I went down a spiral once, a big stone tunnel that went down and down and down, and ended in Zyglac. Whoever built it had no decorating sense at all. Would you be quiet? Said Trinuma. This is a secret mission. Do you understand that? Sure, answered Vezon. Secret mission means if you get killed, I won't tell anyone. And you still haven't answered any of my 110 questions or my follow-ups. Trinuma sighed in resignation. We're going to a place called Destral. Once we get there, your job starts. If you succeed, you live to babble another day. If you fail, you die horribly. Okay? Destral. Wait a minute, that's a Makuta base. Spiria was a Makuta, at least he was until Miserix killed him. I flew with Miserix, did I tell you that? At least until he did those loops and threw me off his back. Ocean water is really cold, don't let anyone tell you different. So what am I supposed to do on Destral? Theft? Assassination? Running with sharp objects? You have the most important job of all, said Trinuma. You're going to betray the Order of Motunui in the entire universe, and this is how you're going to do it. To be continued. Destiny War, Part 3. One of the peculiar things about a Skakti warlord's base is the lack of any kind of a dungeon, torture chamber, or prisoner of war camp. History has shown that there's very little point in torturing a Skakti, as they never talk except in trade, usually for their freedom, which few captors will agree to. And keeping prisoners means listening to them whine for trivial things like food, water, and a good-sized club to use on the stone rats who keep paying midnight visits. So when Brutaka and Axon were marched into Warlord Nektan's camp, no one seemed quite sure what to do with them. Killing them immediately came to mind, but then it would be impossible to find out why they were on the island to start with. Unlike the famed necrofinch of the Zakaz Mountains, most beings did not continue to sing after they were dead. It was Axon who insisted that they be brought before Nektan himself. Nektan was larger than the average Skakti, or at least appeared so, sitting on his throne made from the fused weapons of his foes. He was accompanied by his pet, which looked like a Mawaka cat covered in spiked armor. Nektan, ever the gracious host, asked them if they had anything to say before he had them painfully disassembled. "Yes," said Axon, "the Brotherhood of Makuta." Nektan spat on the ground. The Mawaka growled. "What about them?" asked the warlord. "We offer you a chance to sack their fortresses, loot their weapons, and slay their warriors," Axon said. "We'd throw in make their women weep, but have you ever seen a female Makuta?" added Brutaka. "It's not pretty." "Why should I listen to you when it would be so much quicker and easier to throw you into the Tatarak pens?" "Because we have already been to see the other warlords of Zakaz," lied Axon. "What, did you think we would come to this puny hole first? They have all agreed to ally with us. If you refuse, you can sit on your petty throne and watch as they grow rich and powerful." Nektan frowned, the only expression uglier than a Skakti smile. No self-respecting warlord wanted to be left out of a chance at glorious battle and even more glorious loot. In the end, he nodded. "Why did you tell him we had talked to the other warlords?" whispered Brutaka. "We still have to go to all their camps and talk them into an alliance." "That's a lot of work," Axon agreed, "so I guess you better get started." Toamari Jala stood in the center of Metronui, gazing up at the statue of the late Matoro. It had been constructed by Turaga Anua himself as a tribute to the fallen hero. It was good to know his comrade was remembered and always would be, but it did little to dispel the grief he felt over his death. He had to admit, thoughts of Matoro distracted him. When the other Toamari left to search the city for Takanuva, he chose to remain behind. When they returned, reporting there had been no sign of the Toa of Light, he hardly paid any attention. It still troubled him that the Toamari had been unable to fulfill their destiny without losing one of their own. Behind him he could hear the other Toa in conference. Metronui was quiet for now, with the Cardus dragons subdued and most of the other Rahi back in the archives. Still, the heroes could never relax. Who knew where the next threat would come from? There was a sudden flash of light. When Jala could see again, 6 Toa stood in front of him. He didn't recognize any of them. Instinctively, he readied his weapons. "Welcome to Metronui," said Jala. "Who are you? Why have you come here?" One of the newcomers, a Toa of Fire also, stepped forward. "My name is Norik, of the Toahaga. I ask you and your teammates to stand aside. We have no wish to see anyone hurt while we carry out our task here." "The Toamari stand aside for no one," said Toahuki, stepping forward. "Tell us your business here or be considered our enemies." "Our business," said Norik. "It is as simple as it is terrible. We have come to destroy the Colosseum." Vezon landed hard on the stone floor of the Makuta fortress of Destral. He had been captured by Rakshi less than 2 minutes after Trinuma had dropped him off on the shore of the island. Vezon had never met a Rakshi before and found he disliked them. Most beings had a scent, either pleasant or unpleasant. Rakshi smelled of cold metal and death. The Makuta who came to greet him wore armor of purple and crimson. Although Vezon was polite enough to introduce himself, the Makuta did not bother to share his name. Vezon was tempted to complain about this, but the spear at his throat, the one dripping acid, convinced him to save it for another time. "Who are you?" said the Makuta. "What are you? And how came you here?" "My name is Vezon, your darkness, and I was brought here by an agent of a power that wishes you and your brotherhood harm. They wanted me to come and tell you that they exist, and plan to attack this island, but I'm not going to do that. No, no, no." "You just did," said the Makuta. Behind Vezon, 3 Rakshi moved a little closer, staffs at the ready. "Well, of course I did, but only to tell you that I won't," said Vezon, exasperated. "How could this being hope to conquer the universe and yet be so slow? It's all a trick, you see. They want me to pretend to betray them. They want you to concentrate your forces here against an attack that won't come. But I decided, why pretend to betray them when actually doing it would be so much more fun? The Makuta grabbed Bazan by the throat and slammed him against the wall. Speak, fool, and let only truth and clarity come from your mouth if you wish to continue having one. Truth and clarity. Truth and clarity. I don't think I know them, answered Bazan. Will you settle for white-lipped and trembling? This order of Motunui, it plans to mass an army and a navy, threaten Destral, force you to teleport it away from where it is now, and then... When Bazan did not continue speaking right away, the Makuta tightened his grip. All right, I was only pausing for effect. They have a spy inside this fortress. They've sabotaged your means of teleportation. When you try to use it again, well, I wouldn't start reading any long tablets, let's put it that way. And now that you know, tell me, what are we going to do about it? To be continued. Destiny War, Chapter 4. Axon and Brutaka stood on a steep rise overlooking a battlefield. Down below, the assembled might of the Skakti of Zakaz were locked in combat with a small army of Rakshi. The setting was an unnamed island in one of the southern chains, set up as a staging area by the Brotherhood of Makuta for an invasion of the mainland continent. The Rakshi had been brought there in secret and allowed to practice their skills on the scattered Matoran residents. Needless to say, there were no longer any Matoran on this island. Initially, the Skakti had suffered horrible losses, but they were capable of something that the Rakshi could only pretend to: rage. Hungry for victory and filled with hatred for their enemy, the barbarians regrouped and tore through the Rakshi ranks. It was overwhelming, thrilling, and sickening all at once. Come on, said Brutaka, tearing himself away from the spectacle. You know what we're here for. Together they walked down the hill and deep into a small canyon. In the center, buried beneath a slab of rock, was a square metal trapdoor with an iron ring. After Axon split the rock with his axe, Brutaka grasped the ring and pulled open the door. A stench rose from within, the smell of age and neglect, decay and rot. The two Order of Motunui members climbed down into the hole. Axon sent energy through his axe, illuminating the chamber. It was obvious that no one had walked here since perhaps the beginning of recorded time. The place was bare stone, with the only interesting feature a pool in the center. The waters were greenish-black and swirled angrily, despite there being not even the slightest breeze to stir them. So this is it? Asked Brutaka. Axon nodded. Yes, this is the place the Great Spirit created the Makuta, and the only place new Makuta could ever spring from. From that pool came their substance, made into living form by the powers of the Great Spirit, until time turned it all into pure energy. Then if we destroy the pool, said Brutaka? Yes, there can be no more Makuta ever. But do we have a right to end a species? Brutaka was looking at the pool, eyes wide. I'd love to get into a philosophical debate with you, old friend, but I think we have a problem. The waters of the pool suddenly exploded up and outward. Foul, scalding liquid struck Axon and Brutaka, seeping in through the openings in their masks and armor, and hissed and writhed like a thing alive, burning wherever it touched. Temporarily blinded and in pain, the two warriors staggered and then stumbled, plunging into the pool itself. Toa Helric sat in the command chamber of her fortress on Daxia. The war against the Brotherhood of Makuta had begun, and had not begun well. Although the Order, through the Dark Hunters, now held Zia, they had been unable to dislodge Makuta forces from the island of Ninra. In other places, the Order's surprise attacks had met unexpectedly fierce resistance from Rakshi and Exotoa. Being a leader meant making difficult decisions, something she had always known. In her time, she had sent agents on missions she knew they might well not come back from. She had ordered the deaths of everyone who knew the location of Artaka, and now she had to make two more vital choices that might lead to victory or disaster. The first had been easy. She had dispatched a messenger to Metronui carrying the heart of the Visorak. This artifact could be used to summon the Visorak hordes from anywhere in the universe. It was to be placed in the hands of the Toamari, with instructions to bring it to the volcanic island of Artidax and use it there. The second was more difficult. Brutaka had informed her of the presence of Hydraxon in the pit, as well as the events that took place there. A second messenger had been sent to the pit with orders for the jailer. She could not be sure he would follow them, given their nature, or she would simply be trading the Brotherhood in the end for a worse evil. But it had to be done. Sometimes she hated being the one in charge. Hydraxon paced the dark, cavernous chamber that was the pit. In his hand he held a tablet that contained orders from Helrix. The instructions carved in the stone were almost impossible to believe. The chamber door opened. It was Toa Lesovic, bringing back another escaped prisoner. Although the two had clashed on first meeting, they had since become allies in the effort to recapture the former inmates of this vast prison. Hydraxon hesitated to show the orders to Lesovic. After all, the existence of the Order of Motunui was supposed to be a secret. But if the situation as outlined on the tablet was true, then he guessed it was a secret no longer. Lesovic let out a low whistle as he read the tablet. "So what are you going to do?" he asked. "What I've always done," Hydraxon answered. "Follow orders." He climbed down the iron ladder that led to the lowest tier of cells. Here, Pradek, Kalma, Mantax, and Alek were imprisoned. The four Baraki looked at their jailer with undisguised contempt. "Have you come here to mock us?" snarled Mantax. Pradek smiled, revealing rows of sharp teeth. "We killed you once, you know. We can do it again." Hydraxon ignored the obvious insanity. After all, he was alive and well, so obviously he had never been dead. "I have an offer for you," he said, forcing out each word. "There's a war going on. A war to bring the reign of the Brotherhood of Makuta to an end. Agree to fight against the Makuta, and you will get your freedom." "And if we refuse," said Kalma, "why should we risk our lives to fight someone else's war?" "If you refuse," said Hydraxon, "you will find that there are places you can be buried far deeper than this pit." "Another chance," said Pradek. "Another chance to fight, to lead armies, to conquer. And when the Brotherhood falls, the League of Six Kingdoms will rise again." To be continued. Destiny War, Chapter 5. The Shadowed One, master of the Dark Hunters, mortal enemy of the Makuta, thief, assassin, and conqueror, was bored. Since he and his people had been dispatched to occupy the island of Zia by the Order of Motunui, there had been precious little to do. The island had been pacified in a matter of hours. Except for the occasional 2 or 3 Dark Hunters tapped by the Order for a mission, the bulk of their forces had yet to act. The Shadowed One did not like feeling penned in on this island, or ignored. That was why this day found him prowling the factories of Zia, seeking amusement. Despite his pressure to get all manufacturing centers working again, many of the buildings were still badly damaged by the battle between the Tatarak and the Kanohi Dragon. It was while walking through one such building that he came upon a vortex frantically clearing away rubble. "What are you doing here?" asked the Shadowed One. The vortex gasped, surprised. When he saw who was addressing him, he dropped to one knee and bowed his head. The vortex, it seemed, had a long history of knowing when and to whom to submit. "Nothing, great lord," said the vortex. "Just cleaning up so all factories can be working again as you ordered." The Shadowed One said nothing. He knew what a lie sounded like. He had told enough of them himself. After several moments, he said, "Then I will help you." "No!" the vortex cried out. That's not necessary. This is work for a laborer, not a ruler like yourself." Power flashed out from the Shadowed One's staff. A band of crystalline protodermis appeared around the vortex's mouth, gagging him. "I said, I will help you," repeated the Shadowed One. Striding over to the heap of rubble, the Shadowed One began to dig, never taking his eye off the vortex. The deeper he got, the more visibly upset the Zia native seemed to be. What, he wondered, was waiting at the bottom of this hole? He soon found out. Several feet down, he came upon a protosteel box. Burned into the lid was the symbol of the Brotherhood of Makuta. The box was locked, but the lock was no match for the now very curious Dark Hunter. He opened it carefully. After all, this might be some clever trap. But when he saw what the box contained, his eyes widened. "Oh, my," said the Shadowed One, as he gazed on something that soon might make him master of the world. Vaison, it could truly be said, had a unique perspective on life. Perhaps it was the fact that he had only been truly alive for a matter of weeks. Perhaps it was his time spent wearing the mask of life. Or perhaps it was just the fact that he was hopelessly insane. But the perspective he had today, he had to admit, was a new one, upside down. The Makuta he had encountered in the fortress of Destral, who identified himself with a laugh as Tridax, had not entirely believed Vaison's story about cross and double-cross. In fact, he decided some follow-up questions were in order, the kind delivered while your guest is hanging from the ceiling by his ankles. "I have checked our teleportation technology," Tridax said. "There is no sign of sabotage. You are a liar." "Well, no one ever said Makuta were observant," said Vaison. "How can you be so sure? Suppose I sabotaged it myself, using my incredible powers of the mind." "You have no powers," said the Makuta, picking up a wickedly sharp blade. "You have no mind. You are about to have no head." You're right, babbled Vezon. "There is no army, there is no navy. I simply wanted the pleasure of your company." "Well, pleasure might be too strong a word. Did I tell you I once wore the mask of life? One stray thought back then, and you wouldn't even have left ashes. I do miss those days. Anyway, take pride in being correct. There's no threat to Destral at all." The walls of the fortress suddenly shook violently from an incredible impact. "Except that one," Vezon added helpfully. Rock dust fell from the ceiling, masks and weapons clattered to the floor, and even the anchors of Vezon's chains came loose. A second blast tore a hole in the wall and sent mangled Rakshi flying into the chamber. This time the anchors came loose all the way, and Vezon fell to the stone floor. Makuta Tridax was paying no attention. His orders were clear. Maintain Destral in its current location unless attacked. In the event of a serious threat from Terra or Dark Hunters, teleport the island off the shores of Metro Nui and seize that city. He stalked off to carry out those commands. Vezon followed behind, unnoticed. "That's right," thought the deranged ex-prisoner. "Lead me to your secrets. Ah, this plan is so cunning it might almost be one of mine. And perhaps it will be before I'm done." Far to the west, Prydak watched a fortress burn and smiled at the sight. He had been fortunate since his release from the pit. His captors had provided him with ships and the resources with which to raise an army. From the worst holes in the universe, he had found ex-Dark Hunters, exiled Vortex, even a Skakti or two for his crews. Before Kalma had even devised a battle plan, Prydak had sailed off without him on a voyage of conquest. It felt good. Good to sack and burn and destroy again. Good to feel the warm glow of the lightstones on his body, even if his water-filled helmet kept him from smelling the wonderful smoke and the stench of battle. He was back, and back to stay. His men had routed the forces of the Makuta who occupied this place, but had found no actual Brotherhood member. Now, as he surveyed his conquest, a few things captured his notice. The structure was not original. It had been rebuilt on the site of an earlier strongpoint. The lower levels were still incomplete, and it was while exploring them that he found a strange room. Deep below the basements was a room of rubble. The walls had been smashed, leaving only packed earth behind, and the remnants of those walls lay littered around the floor. Intrigued, he picked one of the pieces up, only to find there was an inscription on it. The symbols made no sense to him, and he was about to throw it away, when he noticed that another piece also had such an inscription. In fact, all the pieces did. There was some sort of message here, or there had been, he realized. Someone had tried to destroy it by shattering the walls, but the message was still here for someone who had the discipline to decipher it. And if someone had thought whatever information it contained worthy of destruction, it must be quite interesting indeed. With the infinite patience of a born hunter, Prydak began to assemble the stones. To be continued. Destiny War, Chapter 6. Axon was drowning. The greenish-black fluid filled his mouth and lungs before he could react. His mighty arms flailed about, trying to find something to grab onto, and failing. As he sank further toward the bottom, Axon knew that here, in the birthplace of the Makuta species, he was going to die. Then he was suddenly rising rapidly up through the murky liquid. A strong hand had a hold of him and was yanking him away from his fate. A moment later he felt the hard stone of the floor beneath him. He choked and gasped. When the colors finally stopped swirling in front of his eyes, he looked up at his rescuer. Brutaka floated 3 feet off the floor. Green fire crackled from his eyes and the tips of his fingers. His armor had cracked in numerous places as the tissue it covered expanded. An aura of pure power surrounded him, so bright that Axon had to raise a hand to protect his sight. "Axon," said Brutaka, "we are glad to see you have survived." "We?" "Brutaka, what's happened to you?" We are the essence of the Makuta species. We know what they were meant to know, but have forgotten. We see the error, the flaws, so much to repair, but it cannot be done." Axon stood, axe at the ready. He knew the effects Makuta antidermis had on Brutaka. Absorbing it somehow made him stronger, but he had never seen or heard of anything like this. It was Brutaka's body and Brutaka's voice, but the words did not come from his old friend. "Spherus Magna, the shattering," Brutaka muttered, seemingly more to himself than to Axon. "The 3 that must be one, the 2 that must make them one." Brutaka abruptly reached out and seized Axon's arm in a grip of iron. His touch burned, but Axon fought back the urge to scream. He must remember. He must be made to see, or the journey of 100,000 years will be for nothing. He hides beneath, preparing to meet his destiny. We must go there. We must right the wrong. So many wrongs, before the shattering can end. Ancient climbed a low rise, stepping carefully to avoid tripping over the rubble that was once a Zeon factory. He had been searching for the Shadowed One for the better part of an hour. They were supposed to be discussing the defense of the city, but the Dark Hunter leader was nowhere to be found. He was concerned. Toa Helrix had asked her that Ancient, her spy within the Dark Hunters, for regular reports on the state of things in Zia and the Shadowed One's actions. She fully expected a Brotherhood of Makuta attack on the island, and he was already overdue with his latest dispatch. Ancient reached the top of the rise. The first thing he saw was the Shadowed One standing amid a pile of debris. He was holding a small chest, which was open, and staring at the contents with a nasty smile on his face. As Ancient drew closer, he noticed two other things. A dead Vortex on the ground, his face encased in crystalline protodermis, and just what was in the chest. 3 vials. "What have you found?" asked Ancient, "and why would a Vortex be foolish enough to challenge you for it?" The Shadowed One looked up, surprised. Then, seeing it was Ancient, he visibly relaxed. "A most amazing thing," he said. "Have you ever heard of Makuta Kojal?" Ancient nodded. He knew the story from the Order of Motunui. Kojal had been visiting Zia to discuss having a virus added into a weapon the Vortex were building for the Makuta. During his visit, he was accidentally killed by a different virus, except it was no accident, but an order operation to remove him. "He brought any number of viruses with him when he came to Zia," the Shadowed One continued. "Some were never found. The story was they were incinerated along with his armor. But they weren't, and I have found them." Ancient tried not to look as worried as he felt. Weapons like this in the hands of the Dark Hunters was a disaster in the making. "Excellent," he said. "We can ransom these for a good price." "Ransom them?" said the Shadowed One. No, I intend to make use of them. I will learn what they are and what they do, and then Helrix and the Makuta will answer to me. But I will need time, a great deal of time, and privacy to work. No one must know I have them. That is why the Vortex here had to die. And it's why twin beams of power lanced out of the Shadowed One's eyes, striking Ancient. The veteran Dark Hunter vanished, disintegrated by the force of the blast. "Apologies, old friend," the Shadowed One said, "but you know the old saying, a secret shared is no longer a secret." Vezon stalked through the halls of the fortress of Destral, following Makuta Tridax and doing his best to remain unseen. The walls of the ancient structure shook from a ferocious pounding. The Order of Motunui had launched his attack on the Makuta base at last. His mission was simple, purposely so that even his deranged mind could keep it straight. He was to follow Tridax, find the means the Makuta used to teleport the island from place to place, and then disable it. He would then most likely be killed by Tridax, but then no plan was perfect. At first it seemed like all was proceeding as expected. Tridax made his way into a sub-basement, seemingly oblivious to being followed. At the bottom of the basement was a massive chamber. What waited within that chamber staggered even the deeply disturbed Vezon. The walls towered 40 feet all around. Lining them were stasis tubes, close to 100, and each tube was occupied by an identical figure. A few had armor of jet black, most white and gold, but it was obvious they were all the same being. They were in some kind of stasis. Tridax walked to the center of the room where a small table sat. On the table was a Kanohi mask. Tridax reached for it, then suddenly whirled and hurled a blast of shadow at Vezon. Before he could dodge, the shadow had pinned him to the wall. "Did you think I could not hear your clumsy attempt to follow me?" said Tridax. "Very well, Skakti trash. You want to learn the most powerful secret of Destral? You want the satisfaction of knowing what hides here before you die? Look around." Vezon did, but he didn't learn anything more by doing that. "Quite a collection," he said. "I prefer seashells myself, sometimes leaves. Oh, and the heads of my enemies, though those take up so much space." Tridax smiled and held up the mask. "Do you know what this is?" "A Kanohi Olmec, the mask of dimensional gates, one of only 2 known to be in existence. Not long ago, my fellow Makuta Mutran and I began experiments to develop a creature called a Shadow Leech, a creature that could drain the light out of others and turn them to beings of shadow. That was what sparked my idea. I knew the mask could reach not only other places in this dimension, but other realities as well, and so I have begun traveling to those other realities and collecting the Toa Takanuva of each, bringing him back here and feeding his light to my pets. When I am done, I will have an army of Shadow Toa, all made from the most dangerous enemy of the Makuta. The wall shook again. I think you better hurry up and finish then, suggested Vaison. No need, said Tridax. I have only to release the Shadow Takanuva I have already made, and they will dispose of the attackers. And then I can go back to work in earnest, and then I can... Tridax stopped at the sound of crystal shattering. Startled, he let his shadow power lapse. Vaison slumped to the ground, but not before he saw the Makuta looking at his arm in horror. Something was dissolving his armored gauntlet before his eyes, and his antidermis was leaking out into the air. Two beings stepped out of the shadows. One was a Matoran, the other another species, very tall and very dangerous in appearance. He looked at the Makuta and laughed, a harsh and malicious sound. The most dangerous enemy of the Makuta, said Destiny War, Chapter 7. Toa Helrix, leader of the Order of Motunui, picked her way across the remains of a battlefield. She was on the beach of the island of Ninra, site of a struggle between the Brotherhood of Makuta and the Order. After a long and furious battle, the Order had won, driving the Brotherhood forces from the island or crushing them on the beach. Now she wandered the sands, occasionally picking up a piece of Rakshi armor, studying it for a moment, and then discarding it. There was a method to her madness. Using her mask of power, Helrix could read the past of an object simply by touching it. Her goal here was simple. Rakshi were created using a powerful substance called energized protodermis. The Order wanted to know every source of that substance used by the Makuta so they could capture or destroy those sources. Without them, no new Rakshi could come into being. So far, all the ones she had identified here were sources the Order already knew about. Still, it was worth the effort. It would be far easier to defeat the Brotherhood by cutting off their source of power rather than beating them in battle. She picked up a piece of crimson Rakshi armor and called on the power of her mask. This time she saw a place she did not recognize. Makuta Kirox was there, and a silvery pool, but not just any pool. No, this one had a figure emerging from it, a being actually made of energized protodermis. She concentrated hard, and the location came to her, an island just north of the one her newest ally came from. Helrix dropped the piece of armor and turned to Kitungu. The Rahi had reluctantly agreed to break off his efforts to save the victims of Visarak long enough to help in the war. In return, Helrix had promised him the Visarak would never again be a threat to anyone else. "We have to go," she said. "There's another source." It was a short journey. Their destination at first seemed uninhabited, but that illusion didn't last long. Helrix spotted things skulking among the rocks. They weren't Matoran or Rahi, but looked like something in between. The overall feeling was that something was very wrong here. The air, the ground, the inhabitants all felt off, somehow, in a way that obviously made Kitungu uneasy. There were no buildings on the island, none left standing anyway. The most prominent feature was a large cave. Helrix and Kitungu entered cautiously. The passage narrowed considerably once they were a little ways in, forcing them to crawl to make any forward progress. Helrix couldn't help but think how easy it would be to get trapped in here. As the passage widened again, Helrix saw more creatures. These obviously were Rahi beasts, but not like anything she had seen before. They were short, pale bipeds with large yellow eyes and spindly arms and legs. They backed away and moved to the side as she and her ally passed, but as soon as the two had moved on, they assembled into a group and followed close behind. Helrix and Kitungu came to a huge chamber. In the center of it was not a pool of energized protodermis, but an actual lake of the stuff. And rising from the center was the figure of a living being, a head, 2 arms, a torso, ending in the lake itself. Its features were barely there, and its substance was the silver color of energized protodermis. The sight triggered a memory. An agent on Metro Nui had reported that Taragavakama had once mentioned an energized protodermis entity his team had fought when they were Toa Metro. Could this be the same being? "I have been expecting you," said the figure. "I have felt your kind at work in my pools throughout this universe. Destructive, but ultimately futile. Cap one source of my substance and it will emerge somewhere else." "Then we will destroy it there too," Helrix answered. "What are you?" I am creation and destruction, the entity answered. I am the power to transform and to destroy. I am every drop of energized protodermis that exists, and every drop is me. I am as far beyond you, creature of armor and tissue, as you are beyond an insect. And your purpose here? Asked Helrix. I did not choose to come here, the entity replied. I lived in the core of a planet until one day a portion of my substance forced its way to the surface. It did not take long for the inhabitants of that world to discover my power, or to begin warring over it. But some of what makes up my form was taken and placed inside this universe, and so escaped before Cataclysm overtook that world. And now, said Helrix, now I experiment on the creatures and things I find around me, said the entity. I have even let others make use of my power if I found their intentions intriguing enough. You have helped create beings that have brought terror and death to thousands, said Helrix. It has to stop. Is a weapon responsible for the actions of the one who wields it? Asked the entity. Perhaps not, said Helrix, but a weapon can be broken and so never used again. A soft sound that might have been laughter escaped from the entity. I have met your kind before. So confident in your power to contain me, control me, or destroy me. You are no more than stone apes reaching for the stars, believing you could extinguish them if only you could get them in your grasp. The lake began to boil and churn. A huge wave of energized protodermis rose up behind the entity, so wide it spanned the whole chamber, and began to speed across the surface toward Helrix and Kitungu. Transformation or destruction, said the entity. Which will be your fate? Let us find out together. To be continued. Destiny War, Chapter 8. There was nowhere to run. There was nowhere to hide. A tidal wave of energized protodermis was headed right for Toa Helrix and Kitungu. When it struck them, it would do one of two things: transform them forever into who knew what, or destroy them both. Desperate, Helrix reached out with her elemental power. Despite many thousands of years of honing her control over water to perfection, it did no good. Energized protodermis, though in liquid form, was not water, and was immune to her abilities. Doom was coming in a great silver wave. Kitungu growled. Helrix glanced at him to see that his attention was directed behind them. Specifically, he was looking at a hole in space that had just opened. Thoughts raced through Helrix's mind. Had Brutaka come to save them? Where did this portal lead? But there wasn't time for answers, only escape. Grabbing Kitungu's wrist, she pulled him toward the hole. They dove in together with no idea of where they would emerge. At the same moment, a figure appeared in the portal. He stepped out into the chamber. If anyone had been present to see, they might have recognized him as the mad criminal Vazon, his face hidden behind a Knohi Olmec, the mask of dimensional gates. And if they peered closely, they might have seen his eyes widen at the sight of a wall of energized protodermis coming right at him. "Uh-oh," he said. Turaga Vakama walked slowly through the corridors of the Colosseum. It had been his workplace since his return to the city of Metronui. Now it was his home as well, along with that of all the other Turaga. Much had changed in the city in recent days, not all of it good. Despite his confinement, he had been able to pick up snatches of information here and there. The fortunes of war had evidently turned against the Brotherhood of Makuta. Numerous Makuta-held islands had fallen, including, rumor had it, Destral itself. It was almost too much to hope for. Perhaps the Great Spirit would awaken to find his arch-enemies vanquished for good. He passed his chamber and headed down a flight of stairs to a secure room. Here were kept weapons, memorials to the Toa Mangai, and one very important Knohi mask. Although Vakama knew that it was one of the safest spots in the city, he still checked on it every day. If the contents of that room were to fall into the wrong hands, he didn't even want to think about it. He was halfway down the stairs when he heard the crash. He raced down to find a half-dozen heavily armed Tamatorans scattered like leaves in a windstorm. The door to the chamber had crumpled with age, and stepping through it was a being Vakama had hoped never to see again. A little over 1,000 years ago, when he was still a Toa, Vakama had battled a being called Voparak. Surrounded by a field that aged anything it touched, Voparak seemed impossible to beat, and it took a Makuta to do it in the end. Voparak worked for the Dark Hunters and sought one thing in Metronui, the thing he now held in his great claw, the Knohi Mask of Time. Vakama froze. He wanted to attack, to avenge his fallen friends. but he knew that no attack of his would stop this creature. Voparak knew it too. He looked at Vakama with something like contempt. Then he shrugged and turned his back on the Turaga, walking away. Vakama followed. A few minutes later he watched Voparak walk out of a hole in the side of the Colosseum. A four-armed warrior wielding a multi-bladed axe bellowed at the sight of the thief and charged. Voparak reached out and grabbed his attacker. In a matter of seconds the warrior aged tens of thousands of years before collapsing on the ground. Voparak kept going, and there was nothing, Vakama knew, that could hope to stop him. Kalma moved warily through the main factory complex of Zia, flanked by Mantax and Alek. He did not want to be here. It would have been far more satisfying to be leading his new fleet against the Brotherhood of Makuta. But Prydak had contacted him and assured him that their old dream of overthrowing a great spirit might live again. Up ahead, sitting on a makeshift throne, was the Shadowed One, leader of the Dark Hunters. He eyed the three Baraki coldly. Perched on the rafters above was Darkness, who watched over the Shadowed One, though not out of any desire to guard him. No, Darkness waited for a sign of weakness in the leader, to kill him so another could take his place. Shadowed One, we bring you greetings from Prydak, said Kalma, and congratulate you on your seizure of this island. The Shadowed One simply nodded, his gaze never leaving Kalma's hideous face. It is Prydak's belief that the Baraki and the Dark Hunters would be well served by an alliance, Kalma continued. After this chaos is ended, someone will need to pick up the pieces of this universe. We see an opportunity. And what do you have to bargain with besides your fearsome reputations, the Shadowed One said, mockery in his voice. Kalma simply smiled. Information. We know that Makuta Pterodax struck the Great Spirit Madanui down, and we know how. We also know that a prototype of the virus used to do it was hidden on this island, and we believe you have it. I, said the Shadowed One, I am a humble administrator of Zia, a mere servant of the people, nothing more. Kalma laughed. You are a lying, treacherous sack of doom, Viper Breath, but you are also very thorough. Oh yes, we've heard all about you and your organization since our release from captivity. If that virus is on Zia, you have it. The Shadowed One's expression darkened. A lesser being would have quaked with fear at the sight. The Baraki, though, were not lesser beings. And if I do? You know where it is. We know how it can be used. And so, a bargain. The Shadowed One considered. He could just kill these three as he had agent, but if they really did know something about how the vials he found could be turned against the Great Spirit, well, that was knowledge worth gaining. He could always kill them later, after all. On one condition, he said. Prydak and I will meet on neutral ground, the land of Korzani. If I am satisfied with what he has to offer, then, perhaps, Dark Hunter and Baraki will walk side by side into a new dawn. To be continued. Destiny War, Chapter 9. It took the Mari a long time to make it from Ardedax back to Metronui, and Jala's first thought upon arriving was that it had been way too long. Metronui was under attack. At first he thought that was Metronui. It was surrounded by high walls with weapons mounted atop them, weapons belching fire and smoke at the attackers. The walls were manned by warriors of all sorts, none of which Jala recognized. Wait, check that. The Berserker battling three opponents at once looked a lot like Huki. What's going on, said Nuperu. It looks like we've walked into a full-scale war. It's been going on for a while, said Holly, but I think it's come home. It was an awesome sight. Ships flying the banner of the Brotherhood of Makuta ringed the island city. Flying Rakshi were assaulting from every direction, firing bolts of energy from their staffs, while others pounded on the walls. In one section, a portion of the wall had already crumbled, and warriors fought in the gap, trying to keep the invaders out. They're breaking through, shouted Nuperu. Let's go, said Jala. We stand or fall with our city. The three Toa hit the gap from behind, using fire, water, and earth to tear through the ranks of Rakshi. They made it through the wall of the city. Beyond the ranks of Order of Madanui agents, they spotted the Turaga manning barricades. Jala rushed up to Vakama. Turaga, what's happening? How did this battle begin? We can thank the Order for that, Vakama replied. Now our problem is how to end it before the city is destroyed. The Mask of Time, said Holly. Can one of us use it to, slow down the Rakshi somehow? I wish you could, said Vakama, but the mask is gone, stolen by a Dark Hunter. He made the gap in the wall you came through. Jala looked around. In his days as captain of the Takoro Guard, he had learned a thing or two about battle strategy. A quick glance was enough to tell him that the order had badly underestimated the ferocity of the Makuta attack. The Rakshi had already gained the tops of the walls in 3 or 4 places, and in one southern section had made it inside the walls as well. As he watched, the defenders of the gap fell back, and the invaders began pouring through. "We need an edge," said Jala, "something the Rakshi wouldn't expect." "There are more Toa coming, but they won't get here in time," said Vakama. "But there might be one Toa here now who could help us. Listen well." It was Holly who found the Toa in question, a Toa of Sonic's named Krakua. When he heard Vakama's plan, he looked at her as if she had lost her mind. "Let me get this straight," he said while blasting Rakshi with sonic beams. "Vakama wants me to cycle through multiple frequencies until I find the one that will awaken something called the Borok?" "Yes," said Holly. "We know, well, we suspect the signal that awakens them is sonic, but we don't know what it is or how to trigger it. If we can awaken the ones under Metronui, and if the Rakshi try to get in their way, well, it might buy us some time for something else we're planning." "All right, I'll try," said Krakua. "No promises." Holly left. Her next move was to be using her power to stir up the ocean to try to wreck the Makuta ships. But before she could do so, everything changed all around her. The stars brightened overhead. The breeze turned warm. The earth shook in a gentle tremor. She didn't know how, but somehow she was certain the Great Spirit had awakened. Beyond the city walls, a storm rose, tossing the Makuta fleet about like toys. Yet that did nothing to deter the Rakshi, who kept on coming. They had broken through the walls in 4 places and were rampaging through Ta-Metru. Nothing could stop them, it seemed. At least until the ground erupted in front of them, and a horde of Borok emerged. It was not a large number, only those specimens that were asleep in the archives and the small nest below it. But it was enough. The Rakshi attacked immediately, and the Borok responded. The 2 sides were locked in combat, and as they fought, the Mari and the Order agents picked off Rakshi at will. The battle seesawed back and forth, with the Rakshi never realizing that all the Borok wanted was to get to the island of Motunui. Had the Rakshi just gotten out of their way, the fight would have been over. The city suddenly shook from a series of explosions. An Order agent atop the wall yelled, "Flyers incoming!" Holly looked up to see 3 incredibly fast aircraft soar over the city, bank as one, and head back toward where the ships waited. One slowed and dipped its wings at her, and she recognized Pohatu in the pilot's seat. The Toa Nuva had come home. Pohatu flew his vessel back out of the city to finish off the ships. Meanwhile, Lua and Kapaka dove, peppering the Rakshi with blasts of light. The sight seemed to rally the city's defenders, who surged back toward the gaps in the walls. Led by Jala and Huki, they drove the Rakshi back. Finally, the storm was over. The Brotherhood ships had gone to the bottom of the Silver Sea. The walls around the city had been battered down, but the rubble was littered with dead Krata and shattered Rakshi armor. Those of the invaders that were intact had flown away, provided they could escape the blasters of the Jetrax, Rocco, and Axelara. Metronui was safe, and as the Toa Nuva confirmed, the Great Spirit had awakened. The power of the Brotherhood of Makuta was broken for all time. Turagaduma and Turagavakama appeared side by side to announce that tomorrow would be a citywide day of celebration in the Colosseum. But Holly did not feel like celebrating, even now. She could not help but remember Motoro, who had given his life that Motunui might live. And despite all the wounded and the dying among the defenders, she could not help but feel it had all been a little too easy. True, there had been some unexpected help, the airships, the Borok, the storm, but they had faced an army of Rakshi. Something told her they should not have won, at least not with so much of the city still intact. She smiled. Turaga no Kama would have chided her for worrying so much. No matter how things seemed, the Great Spirit was awake for the first time in over 1,000 years. Light had triumphed over darkness, hadn't it? The Toa had achieved their destiny and saved the universe, hadn't they? And that meant all was well again. Nothing very bad could happen now, could it? Holly turned to head for Ga-Metru, humming a song Nokama had once taught her, one written long ago that spoke of hope for tomorrow. Perhaps, if not for the music, she might have heard the sound of dark laughter on the wind. To be continued in Reign of Shadows.
Yeah.